Senator Blunt.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary Jewell, I want to thank you for mentioning the Arch in your written testimony. It's one of the very first projects, and maybe in terms of private funding, the largest project in terms of local funding that that's going into that partnership. It does seem to me we have a real opportunity there and in other places to really usher in what I believe is your vision of the second century of the Park Service. I would say I would hope it wouldn't hurt his reputation in the service, but the new regional director, Cam Shawley, appears to fully understand the importance of setting this model, and we're enjoying working with him, as more importantly, the people locally are enjoying working with him. We were able to get some language in the omnibus appropriations bill. Chairman Murkowski supported that language that just would help attract private dollars. What that language does is direct the Treasury Department to invest the dollars privately raised in interest-bearing accounts. I know in the case of the Arch, they intend to raise their goal is to raise $29 million of endowment funding. And I would hope the endowment funding and any future funding raised for that and other projects benefits from that new sense of direction to the Park Service and, more importantly, to the Treasury. I don't think the Park Service ever resisted the idea that private money should actually benefit the project it had been raised for, as opposed to any interest going into the general Treasury.
Yeah, we share a common interest in that, and I have to compliment the St. Louis community. $250 million of private money raised for that City Arch River project, which is extraordinary. And thank you for your efforts so that they could, in fact, use the interest during the interim timeframe as opposed to it going to the Treasury. That's very helpful, and we will continue to advocate for that broadly. Right.
There's another study going on that should be released any time, and I'm just bringing it to your attention to be sure that you spend a little time looking at it. This is on Genevieve, Missouri, which is just south of St. Louis on the Mississippi River. It's a French settlement that still actually has a substantial number of 18th century French buildings in that community, some of which have been under the direction of the state park system for some time. But my belief is that both the state park system and the study that the national park system is about to do will reach the conclusion that a better place to preserve that unique part of our history is probably as a unit of the National Park Service. I would expect that to come out any day. Hope you have a chance to look at it. Like I said, these are 18th century structures west of the Mississippi River. A lot of them are the vertical log structure that was unique to the way that the French were building housing compared to the horizontal structure that other people were, and I'm interested in that and hope you will be too. Just to follow up a little bit on one of Senator Daines' comments of a 3-year date certain on the coal study. I actually don't know how much there is to figure out about coal that we don't already know. I was going to suggest that I thought 3 years was an excessive amount of time for that study. And so you hear that point of view as well as just promises you'll get it done in 3 years. I really think you should look at this and determine what you're going to know that takes 3 years as opposed to half that time, or 2 years, or some time that's less than 3 years. I think the questions on coal have already been well asked. I will say that we're in Missouri, we're 80% coal dependent for utilities. 90% of that coal comes from the Powder River Basin, and the fact that a taxpayer should get fair return there is important, but it's also important in the other energy resources. And while oil and gas on state and private lands have almost doubled between 2010 and 2014, there's been no change, just no appreciable change on federal government lands. I do think that return to taxpayers for what we can minimize the intrusiveness of in terms of oil and gas is an important return. I also know that a significant amount of federal land, over 30 solar projects have been approved since 2010. Not opposed to solar at all, but if you're worried about impacting the way the landscape should look or would look if people weren't involved in the landscape, I'm sure 30 solar projects have more impact on that topic, and there's no federal return. There is no taxpayer return on solar, and I'm not objecting to that. I'm not opposed to solar. I'm not opposed to wind. I'm actually truly am an all of the above person. But if we're interested in fair taxpayer return, it would seem to me that we'd be looking pretty aggressively at why we have 89% more production in state and federal lands and essentially no more production on federal lands, and I'll let you respond to that.
You mind, Madam Chair, in the interest of time? Let me just clear up one point. We do actually charge solar energy companies when they are leasing federal land for solar, for wind. There is a charge to them. Just as we're doing offshore wind in the Atlantic and we're doing lease sales similar to what we do in the Gulf of Mexico for offshore oil and gas.
Good. Would you provide to me or to the committee how that
works?
That works?
Yeah, we're happy to
If
do
that's
that.
a one-time payment or a ongoing payment as you'd have from production from other facilities, I'd like to see that.
Yeah, we're happy to do that. It is an ongoing rental payment. There's a bonus bid up front, and then there's an ongoing rental payment. I think it's per acre, or per tract, but we'll get back to you on that. Also, just to point out, because I haven't said it earlier today, that on the programmatic EIS for coal, it actually is complicated. There's a lot of different interests at stake in a number of different states at stake. There's metallurgical coal, there's steam coal. So we do believe, based on how long it takes us, for example, to do a programmatic EIS on an offshore leasing program, that 3 years is a pretty expedited timeframe. I will be not in this job, clearly. That will change in about 11 months, or maybe we're down to 10 and a half. We do have 20 years of supply of Powder River Basin coal, federal coal, under lease to companies already. And we do have emergency provisions in the pause that we put on the leasing program during the PEIS to allow companies to continue to mine and to get a permit if their mine is at risk of closing because of the pause, or if a coal-fired power plant is at risk of closing because of the pause. We also grandfathered programs that were, or projects that were nearing their completion. So we don't believe there'll be disruption in the supply of coal or to the jobs.
Let me make one point there before we, at the end of my time, and we're at the end of my time, but I noticed the last time was a little extensive too. How long the study would take if the study hadn't put long-term government program in abeyance until the study was over, I think that's two different questions. Patriot Coal in St. Louis just went into bankruptcy, and shortly after they went into bankruptcy, one of the most, as I understand it, I haven't talked to them, but everything I've read about this would indicate that one of the things that they thought would bring them out of bankruptcy were that they were right at the end of the permit process to get access to some coal mining area that they hadn't previously had. That's now postponed until this study is over. I don't know what impact that's going to have on the company, but I assume it's significant. And they, as many others would have pursued what they understood to be government policy, which has just suddenly stopped so the government can figure out what they were doing. It does seem to me the government could figure out what they're doing without necessarily stopping everything we've been doing for a long time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.